It's not the Committee of Correspondence mapping out troop movements against our enemies. Or,
No.
Right?
And he did that later anyway. Like at first, it was more about organizing the people who could give some capacity to independence. Like, in other words, it was really much more about the self-governing capacities of the colonies, because there's no point in launching a war of independence if they couldn't really govern themselves.
All right, well, welcome back to the Cutrone Zone again. With me today is the last Marxist, track coach, and genius, Chris Cutrone. We're going to be talking about, I'm hoping we're going to be talking about how to set up a committee of correspondence in assistance to the beginnings of organizing a socialist party from the ground up, from within
a revolutionary movement.
Yeah. So that's what I'm hoping you'll explain to me so that I can do my job better, basically. Because I am excited in this moment to be able to look away to a degree from the horse race between Kamala or Kama Blah, I don't know what I'm supposed to call her, and the weirdo Donald Trump and J.D. Vance.
Mm-hmm.
So, so just to start there, if you were to have the perfect kind of intellectual cadre of journalists and writers and thinkers to help your project or the project that will become much bigger than you to create a new socialist party, how would it function, Chris? Let's start there, if that's an okay way to begin.
All right. So since you invoked the committees of correspondence, that's the revolutionary organization of the American revolutionaries prior to the war for independence. And it was also a title used by a breakaway faction of the Communist Party USA in the period of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Angela Davis was involved. So there was a committees for correspondence. And they, of course, took the name from the American revolutionaries. And I guess the first thing that I would say is, well, we're kind of not even that quite yet, because the whole colonial rebellion against the British was based on the colonies' self-governance, meaning they were already practicing a great deal of self-governance. And so there was something to, if you will, correspond about. So the committees of correspondence were basically linking up the various local self-governance, not only in terms of the separate colonies, the 13 colonies, but also more local communities in those colonies, because some of the colonies were more pro-British and some were more pro-independence. But many local communities, even in more Tory colonies, nonetheless, were jealously guarding of their autonomy, of their self-governance. And so what we're talking about there, in terms of the American Revolution, because I think that people sort of dismiss the American Revolution as conservative, revolt of the property owners against like British governance, etc., they just lose sight of the fact that there was a bourgeois civil society, and indeed there was a social revolution involved in the American Revolution, insofar as again, self-governance was realized in a new and different way. It was newly constituted because the colonies had a certain degree of self-governance, but this involved a revolutionizing of that and a more thoroughgoing realization of it. So what we're talking about in terms of building a socialist party is, or potentially laying the groundwork, we might say, for the possibility of a socialist party, is trying to establish that kind of autonomous civil society activity that isn't immediately in the thrall of the state, nor swept up into the NGO apparatus of either of the two capitalist parties, right? And therefore also not involved in the electoral struggle of the capitalist parties, right? And really quite neutral in a kind of mutual hostility, but really neutral as regards to capitalist politics. Recognizing it for what it is, And that doesn't mean that people don't, get benefits and don't deal with like the state, the government. Of course they do. But the question is, what needs to be done in addition to that? What needs to be done that cannot be met through the existing administrative state functions, nor through the kind of community organizing that the existing NGOs perform. All right, so there are many levels to this. I think in a private conversation, but also I think on the podcast previously, I mentioned that, this kind of an effort would be, so to speak, in competition with, but not really, trying to find an ecological niche alongside the churches and the gangs. Like when you think of the civil social organizing that exists that is furthest away from the state, of course, the gangs would be one, organized crime would be one. But the churches have a pretty well established, in American political culture, the independence of the church from the state is a well-established idea, that tends to be realized not only in principle, but in practice, in a way that other NGO kind of efforts, there's far less of that. And I would also say, in other words, they tend to be lobbyists for policies, for administrative policies, in a way that the churches don't necessarily bother with all that much. And labor unions, of course, would occupy a kind of middle position, meaning the labor unions that exist and that have existed for, let's say, the last 100 years, like since the New Deal era, have unfortunately relied on state administrative policies, on government policy to function. Whereas prior to that, out of necessity, they needed to be quite independent. Right? And so those are our kind of analogies, both historical and present. Right? And so that would be the kind of activity that would need to link up and transcend local issues and sort of discrete matters in terms of the needs that are met, when people kind of do self-organizing to meet certain needs. What do they have in common? And how could those particular struggles transcend their particularity? Now, the trick is that there already exists. The capitalist parties are already meant to do that. They're meant to be transcending kind of social particularity in a more general political way, right? And so the parties tend to be interest group aggregation machines, right? So they are basically where things are brokered. So that I'm a student of Adolf Reed, so he just calls it like racial brokerage politics, right? And the Democrats, we've talked about that on the podcast previously as well, like the whole Josh Shapiro thing.
Mm-hmm.
The hell is that? Like, is it anti-Semitism? Well, it's only anti-Semitic insofar as the Democratic Party itself is anti-Semitic, meaning the entire ethnic racket model of politics is anti-Semitic, just as it's racist, right? Like, it just is. And it is sexist, and it is homophobic insofar as it treats these groups as constituencies. Because then it has to say, well, the gays versus the blacks, for example. For a long time, it was the black Democrats, is the black constituency that was the impediment to gay rights, especially in an urban setting. So they were the ones who opposed, domestic partnerships, all these kinds of things. It was always the black constituency in urban politics in places like Chicago or New York that resisted it. So they were, as Adolf points out, they were on the right wing of the Democratic Party. The black machine was the conservative, and they still are, I would argue. And so, not to say that anyone is on the left wing. There are all flavors of right wing, basically, right? But there's sort of demonstrable stuff with respect to that. And that's why Trump's hoping to poach along that frontier, right? Because he senses the vulnerability. But, Josh Shapiro, I mean, what the hell was that, right? It was it was kind of like, oh, well, we need more Arab votes in Michigan than we need Jewish votes in blue states that we're going to win anyway.
Well, I thought the logic of Josh Shapiro was to try to secure Pennsylvania.
I know it was, and they just decided that Michigan's more important than Pennsylvania or something. And then Waltz,
well, they have
Minnesota.
the way I see it, unless they get Nevada or something. I mean, I'm sorry, I go right to the horse race, but unless they get Nevada and Arizona,
it's all up for grabs. And I would say it's up for grabs either way, meaning Trump could lose Georgia. Like there are definitely no,
Yeah, it just looked to me like the last time I checked that it really looked to me like the way Kamala Harris could win is if she took all three, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. If
she needed to counteract J.D. Vance and the Midwestern appeal, which maybe Vance doesn't have all that much of anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But, she needed a Biden-esque figure, the avuncular,
Mm-hmm.
and Walz seems to be that. And Josh Shapiro, I think, he could be president.
Right.
Walz can't be president. Right? Walz is just a dud right there. It's like Tim Kaine with Hillary. It's like, yeah, this is not going to be a president. And I feel like when they choose someone like that, they're basically saying, yeah, we've lost this election. It's like when McCain chose Sarah Palin. It's like, yeah, how serious are you? Whereas Romney picked Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan could be president.
Right. What about when George Bush Sr. picked Quayle?
Yeah, that was a little bit of a confession of, I don't know how long we can keep this going. I mean, look, could they really do what Thatcher did? Could they do like 16 years of Republican presidencies? Not really. They kind of knew, no, not really. Right? I mean, in other words, maybe, but maybe not. I feel like Al Gore, Clinton's vice president, was presidential material out the gate. Like there just are these VP picks that are just presidential. Right?
Yeah. And Vance is one of them.
Vance is one. He is. I know the libtards, the Democrats, can't see it, but no, you can see it.
Mm-hmm.
He's going someplace. And Josh Shapiro too. And so I don't know. I mean, I don't know. And he sounds like Obama. If he started doing a speech, and I was in the other room, and I was like, "Is Obama giving a speech?" And it's like, "Oh no, it's the Jewish Obama." It's like Buttigieg is the Jewish. The gay Obama. I was gonna Jewish gay, the gay Obama. But this is exactly how the Democrats have you think, right?
Right. But, okay. From my point of view, right now in this election, well, you can use these old frameworks to judge it and think of it in terms of the horse race and also in terms of the long-term aspirations of the various candidates. And but I think it's worthwhile to remember that actually Kamala was a Quayle, that she was not meant to be the next president. I didn't think at the time, or at least that was
it kind of weirdly played out. I've so there are right-wing conspiracy theories, there are kind of Democrat conspiracy theories. And so there's all this kind of talk about, like the New York Times had various podcasts talking about like, did the Clintonites force Kamala on Biden? That he didn't want to pick Kamala, but then the Clintonites got their revenge. And because of that, she was always resented as the VP pick. And that's why she was actively marginalized by Biden. And I don't know. I think that one makes too much of this. I think that Kamala, when she ran in 2020, even though she pulled out before the primaries actually began, I thought she could be president. And she could definitely be president. She can win this election. She can be president. She can be president, definitely. Now, the factions in the Democratic Party are strange. It's like the Clintonites versus the Obamaites, right?
Mm-hmm.
That these are the basic factions. And Biden sort of is neither and both. Right? Mm-hmm. And so that's less interesting because I feel like at the end of the day, everybody lines up, they are disciplined, there's no sabotaging involved, they're going to pull out a unified effort to win the election. But what we were talking about was the base of the Democratic Party in its community organizing NGO world.
Right.
And also how, religious groups, but really ethnic groups, have their interests expressed. And I would say that is always going to be the Democratic Party. That's what they've been since the 19th century, and that's what they remain. And, it works. It works to a great degree. It works in municipal politics, and it can work as a national politics, as a kind of aggregation of all the municipal politics, right? There are limits to it. It's red state America is some kind of a limit to it, meaning there are areas that they don't have a lock like this. Right? And so they can't run the country out of the cities. They can't. They do have to get the proverbial white suburban woman voter or whatever, or I guess the Muslim voters in Rust Belt, Michigan and Minnesota. They need these sort of unruly voters that are not fully integrated. The way the cities are like Chicago, where I am. I realized that looking at the world through the prism of Chicago politics, it does give you a certain insight. It is illuminating, but it's also very limited. There's a whole other world, right? And that's the Republicans' only chance. And it's the Democrats. It's also the Democrats' only chance, meaning they do have to defeat the Republicans in that field. They have to have a social studies teacher, football coach, hopefully who didn't grope any athletes. Walls. When I heard, football coach, social studies teacher, that sounds nice, except when it isn't, right? I used to remember these, Dennis Hastert out here in Illinois, Republican. Wasn't even Speaker of the House for a second? He might have been, right? And he was like a homophobic, crazy Republican politician. And he was a wrestling coach, He was like
wrestling coaches.
Regular middle class guy. No, there's a lot of physical contact in any sport, except for maybe baseball. But I feel like they slap each other on the asses too. So, sorry, I'll just get in my 1 second of gaydom.
You can be as gay as you want, by the way. I don't care what people.
I know you don't really mean that, so it's okay. Anyway, no, and and the gays are off the reservation too. People look suspiciously at the gays. There are a hell of a lot of white male gays Republicans nowadays. Nowadays, there's your Peter Thiels, there's your Guy Bensons, there's your Douglas Murrays. There's a bunch of us who are traitors to the cause. Right, and
Oh, do you count yourself amongst the gays who are traitors to the cause?
I was never on that. I was always a traitor to that cause. I read somewhere somebody wrote something. Oh, I think it might have been Ben Burgess. It was some description of that was supposed to be damning of not gay but homosexual. Some guy who identified as not gay but homosexual, and just that was supposed to be damning. Was supposed to show how rotten the person was. And I've been saying that since I was a teenager. I'm not gay. I'm a homosexual.
Can you make the distinction for me?
Oh, gay is cultural. Homosexual is sexual. Meaning, do you have to be any particular culture to have sex homosexually? No, but you do have to be in a culture to be gay.
I tweeted out today, and this is definitely a distraction. But there's a Twitter account called Charles Bukowski Quotes. And it's a quote from Charles Bukowski. He says, "Every man is afraid of being a queer. I get a little tired of it. Maybe we should all become queers and relax." Charles Bukowski.
That's very Bukowski, isn't it? I admire that. I admire that. I'm with him on that one.
Yeah. So that's my attitude about homosexuality.
About Tim Wolf?
But not about necessarily about the gay culture. I don't even think I have a real opinion about gay culture too much. But except in so much as it's one of these factions within the Democratic Party, I guess.
No, that's the thing. But it's a fractious faction. I told you that we talked about this, how in Milwaukee some Trumpy Republicans were like, oh, trans have ruined the gay subculture. Gays used to be fun, but not anymore. The trans are
Right.
so much, like, I don't know, fun killers, And I was like, yeah, I don't know about that. You know what I mean? But that was their perception, and I thought that was interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's gone from, like, homophobia to yearning for the days when gays used to be fun.
Right. Yeah.
You know? And I feel like if that's not progress, I don't know what is.
Yeah, that does sound like progress to me. But okay, so to get back into the aims of the Socialist Party, what we'd be doing, I'm going to ask you a question that's kind of maybe odd. It's based on my own pet obsessions a bit. But I feel as though the Democratic Party has exposed its hollowness in a way lately. The way Biden was removed, but really going back to the way the Trump derangement syndrome overall has exposed the hollowness of the Democratic Party. And I feel as though that maybe they're having trouble holding their coalition together because of that. But perhaps not. Maybe it's only about
I don't think so.
These red states.
Yeah, I think it's the swing voters. I think it's down to the swing voters. I think that the Republicans are having a much harder time holding their coalition together.
Right. Well, because they actually broke.
They broke it.
Trump came in and broke that coalition, and now.
Although you'd be hard pressed to get any Democrats or any leftists to admit that. The obvious.
Right. Actually, I had a conversation again on Twitter with Dennis Perrin, who's a longstanding leftist. One of the first people I interviewed on Diet Soap. He's a comedian. He used to work for Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting for a while, I believe. And I tweeted out something along the lines of, you have to accept that Trump broke the Republican Party and that the party of Bush and Reagan and Cheney has been defeated by Trump, and that those who remain in that faction are homeless and looking for a place to go, probably to the Democratic Party. And his response to me was, "You're thinking too hard. There's no reason to think this much about Trump. There's nothing there."
Well, you know what the trick is? Did Trump break it, or was it broken?
Right.
Right. In other words, he realized what possibility there was in it having already been broken.
Right.
Right. So I think that's the other point is, can you attribute a great deal to Trump? I mean, look, what you can attribute to Trump is that he saw the opportunity and seized it.
Yeah.
But an opportunity for what? Centrist policies.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, some of them are very, like, he's running on school vouchers, right? Or charter schools or something.
Standard. I mean, look, everything looks very standard Republican and looks very standard neoliberal. And so what we're dealing with in terms of the inability for people to see what's happening is we're dealing with two different cross currents, right? One is what the crisis of the Republicans means. In other words, for the Democrats, it's like, well, the Republicans were always full of shit anyway, so the fact that they're incoherent is not saying anything. It's like, yeah, but they kept the coherence going for a while there, for a good, 40 years, And the cross current then is the progressive moment that we've talked about, meaning the two aspects of the millennial left, meaning the socialist aspect and the progressive aspect. And they were very discordant, but the difference was blurred. And even though I was only interested in the socialist aspect, I was very skeptical of the progressive aspect, not because I'm against reforms of capitalism, but because I didn't think that the political will was there, right? The ability to pull it off was really there. And, but now it seems to have been disproven by Biden being the most progressive president ever, and Kamala, offering the most progressive campaign ever, right? And the DSA has taken credit for walls,
Right.
right, in an absurd way. And Bhaskar himself has also, right? He just says
Taking
it's
credit for
not.
walls.
Yeah, he says that it's not due to the Palestine pressure, though. It's due to the slow social democratic mission pressure.
That seems, I mean, neither of those things are the reason why I don't think, but I've been so skeptical of
that progressive aspect. I don't know, like, I don't know whether, I was talking with my social workers. I don't know whether Kamala's going to say, I was a hard-nosed prosecutor, and that's why I can be trusted to do criminal justice reform. Kind of like Trump being like, I'm tough on crime, and that's why I can forgive criminals.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if she's going to do that. I kind of don't think so. I wish that she would. I wish that she would, but I don't think it's even going to be that. Right? So that's where I feel like, yeah, they need to win an election. They need to get the youth vote. They need to get the canvassers. They need to get them excited at something. And they can't really resolve it around the Palestine issue, so they can throw some social democratic bones. But are they really going to do it? No. I mean, here's another little insight that I had. I was teaching Das Kapital and the Grundrisse last week, and I was teaching Lukács this week. And I was thinking about the ironies of, like, policy in capitalism, and how, like, Obama and Biden kind of blew it. Meaning, if only Obama had put up the money in the Great Recession that Biden put up after COVID, imagine how different things would have gone. And yet it was impossible to do that in the Great Recession, and only possible in the COVID era. And the effect of it now is so much more deleterious. In other words, like back in 2008, it would have been like, well, you can't do that. The inflationary pressure, blah, 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 right? But then they do it with COVID, and then it doesn't like rescue the economy and do a Green New Deal. It doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, it just produces this economic trap that they're in that's going to cost them the election, right? And so the irony is, when it was needed, it couldn't be done. And when it could be done, it wasn't actually needed, and it was counterproductive.
Well, okay.
This massive spending.
You've given me a way to segue into the question I want to ask, but so when the economic
crisis, you see how the progressivism, it's a funny paradox, where Obama used to be the most.
Well, I want to ask you this question about it, because during the economic crisis, that's when I started getting involved with Marxism, and that's when I ended up in the MHI for a little while. And one of the things that was appealing to me about that was that it was standing against the progressives. It was saying, no, we're not going to be able to tax and spend our way out of this. This is a more deeply rooted problem. There are unintended consequences for all of the progressive remedies to it, including big infrastructure spending bills or pumping the economy full of cash or things like that. And, inflation, that you have to listen to the right wing, in fact, on this, because they're not wrong about some of these things.
They're not wrong.
So I just want to wait. Let me get to the question. Mm-hmm. So when you say that maybe it would have worked then, but it couldn't work now, I'm a little skeptical. I'm not sure why you think it would have worked under Obama, but didn't work under Biden. What was different about this moment than that moment that would have made it more?
It would have involved some things, right? I think I wrote about it at the time in an article that's in The Death of the Millennial Left about Milton Friedman and Hayek. And it's basically, look, why couldn't they do that in the aftermath of 2008? Because it actually would have meant a more nationalistic policy that would have been more disruptive for the global economy than they were willing to contemplate, let alone risk.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Trump comes in with this nationalism, and Biden continues it. And yet, in such a way, like I think that Trump basically, he's like the do-over Obama guy. Meaning he's like, if I had been there instead of Obama, I would have handled it better. They squandered an opportunity, but it's not too late, right? Whereas it might be too late now for Trump's remedies, actually, right? So the only thing that he can say is, well, look, we've had Obama and Biden failure, and so I wasn't really given a full chance the first time, so give me a full chance the second time, and this time it will definitely work. And it's like, yeah, but the moment might have passed. I feel like with both Trump and Bernie, they were like, in 2016, they were like, yeah, let's do a do-over of Obama.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so that's the thing. It's kind of like, because it seemed that the crisis was sort of protracted, just carrying on and on and on into the Trump term, and then the economy started picking up. And I think I told you at the time, there will be a boom after the bust. And was that due to Trump? Because of course Obama was there to say, oh, we teed it up for you. And so you're going to try to take credit for the long-term success of our policies. And then COVID happens and Trump does his spending. And then he says, but Biden fucked it up. Meaning, if Biden had done nothing, he would have had a successful presidency. But he made the changes he felt he needed to make. Twofold, the Green New Scam, as Trump calls it, changing the fossil fuel policy, although now they're pumping as much oil as they were under Trump, actually.
Right.
But the circumstances are different. And they did this Inflation Reduction Act that really wasn't that, and that was an infrastructure bill, but it wasn't, because it was spent on human infrastructure rather than on physical infrastructure. And so Trump is there to say, if he had done nothing, it would have been better.
Right.
But if Trump had been reelected, it would have been even better. Right? Because he would have pursued physical infrastructure, and he would have kept the fossil fuel policy that he had, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's just, again, I'm interested in, let's not lose sight of the historical ironies. And it's not that you listen to the Democrats and you listen to the Republicans on this point. Listen to the mainstream economists on this point, because they point these things out. Right? Just the straight up economists, like the Wall Street types, you know, and why they were gravitating towards Trump.
Right.
Now, in this election, in a way that they might have been more neutral in 2020 or even in 2016. Right? And so I'm always interested in, well, we talked about last time, look, it doesn't work out. These policies don't work out. Either private sector policies adopted by corporations, their strategies, nor the government strategies. But the political will, I mean, that's really the issue with progressivism, is where's the political will? Meaning the climate approach. Like, I understand, yes, as Marxists, we're supposed to reject Keynesianism. Fine. Yeah, I reject Keynesianism. But really? In other words, you reject it because you have a different goal than Keynesianism has. You don't reject it because it's like incorrect or something. Like what capitalist policy is correct? None of it.
Well, from the way I was thinking before, the reason why I have a different goal is because of the internal contradictions of capitalism and the way it can't actually achieve what it sets out to achieve. If we could achieve a society where everyone could have a job, everyone could participate, everyone would be at least secure of a decent enough living, and innovation would happen so that we had a freedom through capitalist innovation, right? So, you know, I'm not sure if I would be against that. You know, if the trouble is that the way in which we produce and reproduce the world is in contradiction to itself. So there's constantly crises that bring immiseration. There's uneven development. So because if Keynesian solutions worked, if they were correct, then I don't think, you know, socialism would be necessary.
See, That's the most honest thing I've gotten you to say. No, it still would be necessary. It would be necessary in another way. I mean, this is where we have to remember the 60s generation, the revolt against affluence.
Right.
Meaning, what does the success mean? Right? Like, what is the content of that success? Because it didn't just come down to, okay, like, look, the golden age, the three glorious decades, right, as the French call them. What did that look like? Because it didn't only look like that in the metropole. It also looked like that in the developing world. It looked like wages were at their highest and hours worked were at their lowest in the entire capitalist epoch, right? So who can argue with that, right? So the Ben Burgess argument is that's freedom, meaning if you have enough money and if you have enough free time to do what you want to do, that's freedom. And it's like, but is that?
Right. Well, okay.
Because the 60s generation didn't revolt because they were like, this won't last. They revolted thinking it will last. And the horror of that.
Yeah, but the 60s generation, the way I remember it, was they revolted because of the inequity and the injustice of a racialized system of prosperity, which wasn't even, and because of the wars. The
war came late. The war came late, like meaning the Vietnam War only really impacted late. It's when they ramped up the troops. There wasn't really an anti-war movement when there was advisors and the Phoenix, Operation Phoenix.
Right, I know. The anti-war movement started like 67.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And that's when they're sending the massive amounts of troops, right? So, I mean, I would say, we talked about this last time, the civil rights movement. Yes, it was a movement against inequity, but it was also based on prosperity. I mean, the sad thing is that in terms of like comparative or comparable, in some ways, blacks have lost ground since 1960. Right? Which is, I mean, it depends on how you measure these things. Of course, there has been a black middle class, a black capitalist class that has grown since the 60s. However, it's also grown in the way that the white middle class has grown, meaning very unevenly. And so, like, the sort of middle class, like, the white middle class is much wealthier than the black middle class. But if you lop off the wealthiest end of the white middle class, and you compare, like, cost of living, standard of living to, like, the 50s and 60s, what you're going to find is that they've just tread water since then. They haven't actually improved, right? And so there was much more of a convergence in terms of the black working class and the black middle class with the white working class and the white middle class in those three glorious decades, actually, right? And
no,
so
I don't disagree with that, really. And when I say that there wouldn't be a reason for socialism if capitalism could keep its promises, I don't just mean on the level of, a chicken in every pot, right? But I do mean on the level of social mobility, political freedom.
Social mobility? Who needs social mobility? You mean in terms of getting wealthy, or in terms of, like, I don't know, move anywhere
in terms of move anywhere you want, take on any job you want, not being constrained to any particular lifestyle or
economic, though.
It's not just economic, but it's
but a lot of that kind of social mobility is economic too, even not just in terms of climbing the ladder economically, but in terms of having options.
Right. No. So if the wages could continue to be high and provide people with not just leisure time, but some options, savings and freedom under capitalism, then I don't see why we would need to.
But this is petty bourgeois democracy, like we've been talking about, meaning this is bourgeois, and it's fine as far as it goes. But I feel like I'm remiss if I don't remember certain things. Because look,
I'm not telling you this like I must be right, but I'm just trying to explain my own
Gen X. We are bitter at not having the lifestyle of our parents or the options of our parents. Right? We are. Like, we are definitely the first fail son generation, for sure.
Right.
right? And then the millennials also have gone through that, and who knows with the Zoomers. All right. And so, like, look, so in other words, I'm just like, yeah, that new left, revolt against affluence. What were they even talking about? Fuck that. Like, I'm a Marxist, I'm a socialist. Capitalism is what matters, not these like lifestyle issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then I have to remind myself, yeah, but there was a new left. And they did actually take Marxism seriously. And it wasn't out of immiseration. It wasn't out of joblessness. It wasn't.
No, I know. Guy Debord was not writing against immiseration, right?
Right.
He was writing against affluence, actually.
Right. Or Andre Marx. In other words, that there was an idea that there were possibilities. And so like I said, I correct myself in terms of my worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And, just basic assumptions about the way things are. I have to remind myself, actually, things were different in the 60s than they were in the 90s.
Yeah.
80s,
Yeah.
And so that's, for me, so I'm prepared to say this is it will be dialectical, but it will sound like total sophistry.
Okay.
All capitalist policies succeed. And they all fail. But for us to say as Marxists, all capitalist policies fail, that's a little too easy. The difficult challenge for us is recognizing that they succeed. Can we admit that and maintain our criticism of capitalism?
Right. Well, yes, but to a lot of people, especially in our generation and after, you're going to sound utopian and perverse, but I don't fundamentally disagree with you, but the question becomes, if you do assume that Keynesianism could work forever, that you wouldn't run up against internal contradictions that did push you back down and destroy the boom and immiserate a large part of the population. If we could imagine that higher wages, more options, technological innovation, mobility, not just like social mobility in terms of education, but that would be it too. Higher and higher educational levels of achievement broadly through the population. The question becomes, what would socialism be other than that? What is it that we're striving after other than that? And at that point, I would say, well, the trouble might be reification. And overcoming reification. The trouble would be being free enough to understand the foundation of our society as a mode of production, which we still should have the freedom to alter. That we don't want to be.
What's the
stuck.
direction? What's the point? Meaning, so this summer I was reading Hannah Arendt, and I had done a deep dive with her a few years ago, and I write about her in a couple of respects. Actually, in an article on Lukács, and also in another article on revolution, like revolutionary politics and thought, in the new book. And I read The Human Condition, which I had not read before. So I'd read some things. I'd read The Origins of Totalitarianism. I hadn't taken her too seriously. And then I read The Human Condition, and I was like, oh, and the parallels with Adorno were striking. So both writing in the post-war world, and both saying, okay, well, it seems like technology has been harnessed for human betterment, but what is it all for? And they both use the same metaphor, actually, which is we can send humans to dead planets, right? That it seems like the only thing left to do with the success of capitalism is to do something whose purpose is entirely questionable, right? And neither of them are like, well, why should we go to dead planets when we are killing our planet here? Even though at that time there's massive ecological devastation. Like, I feel like the children today have no idea what post-war capitalism looks like in terms of pollution and destruction of the environment. They're like parsing like climate change, the micro temperature changes, and things like that. It's like, no. Really, you should see the world as circa 1970, And, you know, but they didn't even bring up that. Like, it wasn't like, why should we go to a dead planet when we're killing the living planet? Right? Instead, it was the triumph of labor. The triumph of labor, what is it all for?
Mm-hmm.
That's what socialism is supposed to be about.
Right. It's a very difficult question, and you start. For me, I start going back into philosophy and almost theological.
You know what the capitalists have done? They've
What?
been like, you can't question the purpose of labor if you're starving. And so
Yeah,
let's try that one. Like, in other words, like, insofar as there was this moment of reaction against the 60s, in the 70s, also in the context of the downturn, provides an opportunity for this. But, you know, these people were like, maybe we have an overeducated population. Maybe they should work longer hours for less pay and be less educated in order to keep social control.
Yeah.
That was a conscious offered policy. Now, did anyone really take that up? No, but it just so happened that it worked out that way. Meaning, we're back to, like, Murray Bookchin. Like, Murray Bookchin's like, we don't need a socialism of scarcity. We've put that behind us. And it's not like scarcity reanimated socialism. It didn't. For most of our lives, we had scarcity, but no socialism. Remember that.
Right.
Right?
What reanimated it, I thought, was a combination of the war on terror and the economic collapse after, which was the war on terror was not an immiserating for Americans or even for most of the world, but it was completely kind of an abomination, and especially after the ending of the Cold War. And then you had the economic collapse on top of it. It's like the feeling that there was a legitimacy crisis that arose, right? So the legitimacy crisis for labor as a way of life is what socialism wants to take on, and in a way that's open-ended. Like, we're not going to say the way to overcome that legitimacy crisis is to offer another.
So you were around the Marxist humanists, and so you were in the faction of Andrew Kleinman, but you know Peter Hudis.
Yeah, I've interviewed him a few times.
Right? And so Peter Hudis once chastised me, right? Because I was trying to do this, like, Moche Postone, except also traditional Marxism. And he was like, yeah, but Chris, you know, the problem with the millennials is that as soon as they all find jobs, they're not going to be socialists anymore. And I was like, that might be true, but I also thought, no, there was a kind of utopianism to it. You know, fully luxuriated automatic gay, automated gay communism or whatever. Meaning there was a kind of like, yes, we're against this austerity, but we don't want to simply reverse the austerity.
Right.
Right? And so, you know, that's what made me think. And it's always been this, like, uncomfortable marriage of the 60s and the 30s, the millennial imagination of socialism. And the stupidest way in which that's the case is that it's FDR New Dealism plus Democratic Party identity politics. But wasn't there more still in the attempt to combine those? Wasn't there something more? I thought there was.
Yeah.
They themselves may have forgotten it, but I remember the aspiration.
Right. And so I think there's a reason why socialism is appealing to younger people, because it's something you can discover as you are coming of age and trying to figure out what your life is headed towards and what kind of person you want to be. And as you come up against the limitations that seem unnecessary through that process. So, and so, yeah, I
there's
do
some
think
optimism to it.
There is definitely optimism. Yeah. Right. And I still feel some optimism in this moment, but I do find myself being driven by a kind of pessimism, which maybe is a reflection of my age, which is, you know, the feeling like, oh yeah, you know, we are living in 1984. This is like, we really are
feeling. Also, our age means that we know that there are only so many more rounds on the merry-go-round for us.
Right. That's true.
There might be one last merry-go-round.
Well, how long do they last again? 20 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Right?
Yeah, for where I'm functional, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
To be able to really do it, you know?
Right.
You know, so what's the other thought that I had? Well, you know, the Palestine issue, which I know has been whatever sore point. But nonetheless, I mean, the paradox here is that, of course, the Palestine solidarity protests are born of a kind of youthful optimism. The problem is the taint of pessimism and cynicism that's baked in to the framework of the whole thing. And I feel like the cognitive dissonance that I've been trading on, if you will, has been, okay, two things can be true. One is that this is actually the worst atrocity that has taken place in the Israel-Palestine conflict since 1948.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that there's any greater possibility now than there has been all along. In other words, you know, the mismatch of, oh, it's the worst atrocity, which must mean that it's some like profound crisis of Zionism, otherwise they wouldn't be killing all these Palestinians. And it's like, actually the atrocity is that they don't need to kill all these Palestinians. Like, in other words, it's not a fight for survival of Israel that necessitates this amount of violence. It is not. Rather, the Palestinians are simply so vulnerable that they can die by the tens of thousands just because. That's the true horror of it, but that has no political character. You know, it's like saying, I don't know, the evil of the Nazis was proven by the concentration camps, the gas chambers. And it's like, actually, the Nazis would have been just as evil if they hadn't killed 6 million Jews.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's the Hannah Arendt, the banality of evil idea. Meaning, the true horror of it is that it was unnecessary. Mm-hmm. Right? But that's not the way our minds work. Our minds want to give significance to things. And it's like, but what if they don't have any significance? You know, what if it is, as Kamala says, the passage of time, unburdened?
We're unburdened by what has been.
Because I'm in favor of all that. I'm in favor of being unburdened by what has been. In other words, should we feel a particular burden of the Holocaust or of the Nakba? We should not. Right? But our minds don't simultaneously work
there's different ways to read that, right? I mean, 1984 was a critique of Hegelianism and Marxism, both, I think.
Yeah, you know those British, they're so philosophically retrograde with their empiricism.
Yes, but nonetheless, you know, you can say they're retrograde, but that's a one-sided understanding of what their.
What is it? Politics in the English language? Is that the essay?
There is an essay, I think, about the English language.
Yeah, but is it politics in the English language? It's something like that.
No, I don't. Maybe. Yeah. He was railing against propaganda.
Yes.
Right.
And I just thought you can't hang your hat on that one. Yeah. Like, you can't say that the cure for propaganda is the proper use of language. That's another Englishism, right?
Right.
Can't. It's spiritually connected to the anti-Hegelianism. That is.
I'm sure that it is, and I'm not trying to defend the anti-Hegelianism here, okay? But what I am trying to point out is saying, look, the idea that we're going to be unburdened by what has been, you know, and
we have to earn that. We have to earn that. I mean, look, I am for historic.
Let me give my explanation here.
Okay.
So the problem with the way Kamala Harris means it is, in this moment, is please forget how I got coronated or, you know, installed.
But she didn't make up that. She didn't make up that phrase for that. That was a phrase from before.
I know that, But nonetheless, the way it reads, what it means right now to be
It
unburdened by
attained
what
to its
is-
concept only after the way they got rid of Biden.
right. And at the same time, there have been like efforts to erase some aspects of her track record from the historical record online.
I'll just use a Trump quote. You ready?
Yeah.
Only an idiot doesn't change their mind.
Yeah, but you can't change the historical record. You can't change.
No, I know. She would be much better to do what Trump does and say, I changed my mind. But they can't do that because the Democrats are the Justice League of America, always on the side of right.
So when you ask us
you know,
to be unburdened of the past, one way to read that is to basically to be unburdened of, unburdened of our memory and unburdened of our reason. And I that's how I hear it right now, and that's how Orwell heard it back then.
She is Orwellian, but remember, she's more Brave New World than she is Orwellian.
Right.
She really is. That's the dystopia that we're really in. The dystopia of 1984 is too optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because it still assumes that you have to manipulate people that way, whereas the people in Brave New World are beyond needing to be manipulated.
Right. There are a few of us.
That is, and we suffer mightily for it because we feel everything as manipulation, but it's not even manipulation. It's just like, what the hell's wrong with you that you don't go with this?
Walter Kern was watching a segment of MSNBC on the show, and I don't know who they were that were talking. I should probably memorize these people's names, but he says, whoever Kamala Harris picks, whoever is in this position, we're sure to experience a huge wave of exuberance. It's already happening. The huge wave of exuberance for who Kamala Harris picks. And Kern just made a face, and it's like he was completely exasperated and thought it was the most absurd thing he ever heard. He says, everyone is so exuberant about whose ever name is going to be in that bracket. The fact that there's a bracket there, they're even now, before they know who it is
enough reason for excitement.
Yeah. and which is absurd, of course, right? Why would you be excited about the possibility? Basically, you're being instructed, whoever we pick, you need to back and be completely excited and enthusiastic about.
Absolutely. Now, James Carville has already pointed out that this exuberance can't last, and that if they think they can win the election that way, they're more deluded than they even seem.
Right. But it does, maybe you're right, but it does.
It's a Hail Mary, Doug. Look, I want to say this about these elections, right? So 2016, it was the Stop Hillary election. Who's going to stop Hillary, Bernie or Trump? Somebody's got to fucking stop Hillary. But why? Hillary's not so bad. Because they just couldn't do it. They couldn't do one more term of Obama. They couldn't do Libya, Syria. They couldn't do more of this whatever neoliberalism. They couldn't do Bill Clinton for the 10th time because Obama was like the second Bill Clinton administration. They just couldn't do it. So it was the Stop Hillary election, right? 2020 is the Stop Trump election. This is also the Stop Trump election.
Right. Very much so.
Very much so, but that's not enough. In other words, imagine if 2016, if Hillary was only about stopping Trump, then she would have had no chance whatsoever.
Right. But Biden had a chance being the Stop Trump candidate. And he won. Because of COVID. COVID. Yeah, but okay.
That's the real. I mean, if COVID hadn't happened, Trump would have been reelected. And you would not be a socialist anymore.
I would not be a socialist anymore.
You would never have liked Chris Cutrone.
If Bernie had won?
No, if Trump had been reelected.
Oh.
I don't know.
No, I would still be I would still be a socialist.
You'd be a socialist at some point, but you wouldn't be Cutrone pilled.
Maybe not.
Maybe
Maybe
not.
not.
Maybe not. I don't know. So I mean, I'm teasing you, of course.
Yeah, I know, but what I'm trying to get at is the reason why I think this moment, to go back to the actual topic in a way, and I think what we've been discussing all along in various ways.
But what's the content of the bracket? Stop Trump.
Oh, right. That is the content of the bracket. And yeah, and Kern didn't realize that. Kern just thought, well, these people are mindless sycophants who will just, and we're being instructed.
But that's why they have to stop Trump too. Because the reason that the Democrats have to stop Trump is that they don't want anyone to be thinking about the things that you have to think about in the face of Trump.
Namely?
Well, what is the landscape of American politics? What are these parties for? What is the U.S. going to do in the era after neoliberalism? What kind of world order is there going to be, really? Right? Like, just everything. Whereas the Democrats are like, nothing to see here. No, none of that. That's all just like Putinism or something. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah, well, see, we've been talking about why socialism is necessary this whole time. Okay. And what I'm hoping is that because of the way the Department of Homeland Security and the Democratic Party have been wed since 2016, the way in which more and more overt, open exertions of control have been put forward by the Democrats, and because of the way they kind of mishandled this election and are propping up someone to my eyes, based on just having heard her speak a bit, seems rather like an empty suit, like, and kind of obviously just someone who will do what she's told to the best of her ability. Because of all that, the necessity for an independent political movement from society is made obvious for those who still have eyes to see.
Here's the difference, right? So she's going to do what she's told. Who's going to tell her? The corporations and the deep state.
Right.
But isn't that what every politician does? And meaning Trump basically does that too, except he might say, nah, I'll try something a little different. But it's not like he's saying, I will definitely not do what the deep state says, and I will definitely not do what Wall Street or Silicon Valley say. He's not that.
No, right? I know he's not. I know.
Right? And so, again, it's a peculiar thing why they have to oppose Trump to the extent that they do, because he does not represent a threat to them other than indicating their own fragility.
But they make him represent that threat.
Right. I mean,
if they treated him like a normal politician, they would have, first of all, I think,
taken a lot of his support out from under him. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they're trying to do that now with the weird thing.
Yeah, no, it's a shift away from Hitler to weird, right?
Right. And
they finally landed on something. It's actually not that dumb.
No, it's not that dumb, but it also won't work because, I mean, there are a couple of things. One is she is in the unenviable position of being basically untested and being the incumbent.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In other words, she can't really disavow the Biden record. She can't say, you know what, we're turning the page. We're going to do something entirely different. She can't do that. No one would believe it even if she did do it. But she can't do that. Because after all, it's not like she needs to be told what to do. Right? In other words, what else is she going to do? Meaning, of course she's going to do what the deep state and the corporations say, because there is nothing else to be done. Right? The fact that Trump has a few crackpot ideas about some little things that could be done also, they're like, no. Right? But really the issue is, it really is about these elections. And it really is about whether the electoral map changes in a way that's unwelcome to the parties and the way they are happy to compete and not compete. Mm-hmm. And, he just throws a variable into the mix that they'd rather not deal with. And but I mean, he is a genius. He's a stable genius, very stable genius.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know the incident, because it happened in Chicago? I'll make mention of it. The National Association of Black Journalists,
Oh yeah.
where he questioned the racial identity of Kamala Harris. Well, guess what? There was a focus group on CBS prior to that Trump or his team probably saw, where a young black man said, well, she's not even black. I heard she's half Asian. And I feel like that gave Trump his talking point. In other words, and then other people were like, oh, yeah, that's true. And then Trump was like, I'll try that one.
Right.
And of course, like, the journalists and the black bourgeoisie, are just like, what are you talking about? Biracial is black and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, but you know what? Actually, people don't think that. They don't. And Trump doesn't need to know anything to know only that. Right? And
well, I mean, he couldn't do it. I don't think he couldn't make that play if her father had been African American.
No, that's true too. That's true too. Absolutely, that's true too. Because that's the other thing that, like, the libtards don't understand, is that black isn't black. Meaning,
Malcolm X knew that.
Yeah, well, everybody knows that. Obama knew it, meaning that he had to marry an African American woman in order to really be black.
Right.
He had to have African American children in order to really be black. And not because he was biracial, but because he was Kenyan.
Right.
It's like, everybody kind of knows this, except you're not supposed to talk about it, right? Because it's supposed to be like black solidarity. And it's like, no, I'm sorry. I live a block south of what is colloquially known as Nigerian Towers. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They are not black.
Right.
They are not. Definitely not. Right? They are not. And so they might vote Democrat. They might. But they might vote Republican too. But it doesn't matter because they're a tiny minority.
Right.
Right? But it's not the same proposition. Right? They might be more likely to vote for Kamala because she's not black.
Right.
She's an immigrant. And so they might be like, oh, we can relate to that. Because these are like middle class immigrants.
Yeah. No, look, there's all sorts of reasons to vote, I guess. But
But just the identity politics people don't get. Meaning they play the identity politics really hard, but they don't know how it actually works with normal people. And that's all to say the fragility of capitalist politics. It's like they've gotten so ossified and narrowed down with their incremental market research messaging kind of things that they've really abandoned a whole rhetorical field. Right? And then, of course, Trump doesn't care about any of that. Mm-hmm. And he is a marketer, basically. Right? That's his special acumen, is to pick up on marketing opportunities, branding, basically. Mm-hmm. And, and the fact that he represents a vulnerability for them, that's what's remarkable. In other words, I think I mentioned this last time. It's like Bernie and Trump. Like, I was like, am I living in virtual reality? What the hell is this? Right? I was like, in what possible world could Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump be viable presidential candidates? And yet, immediately, it was clear that they were.
Right.
And why? Because of the bullshit of the parties. Because they had just run out of steam, exhausted completely. And just exhausted, not just even on policy. Obviously, the policies were exhausted. But they were exhausted just at a rhetorical level. At a pure messaging, branding, marketing. Like, if politics has been reduced to that, they were exhausted on that. And of course, both Bernie and Trump tried to give that some substance. Meaning, take advantage of that weakness in order to actually try something substantive, in fact. And only incrementally, but just some, not like a terrible amount of substance. Not like what the millennials thought about Bernie, no. But something. Like, again, Obama redo. Could we take advantage of the Obama opportunity, just do it a little bit better? Can we just... If you
give me a minute here, because I have a thought that I want to try to articulate to you, but I may not get it out all at once. But so it's an anecdote, or it's a little. it's a little detail from my virtual life. I am I have a Twitter followers and people whose tweets I see a lot who are not leftists now because Elon has changed the algorithm. So I'm encountering people who are not, seeing my tweets because of I'm in their milieu, right? And I forget the name of this guy, but he has a podcast, I think. He's young. He's like 22, 23. And he's been tweeting. I think he's got a movie podcast, maybe. And he's been tweeting about 80s sex comedies and how great they are. And how great it is.
Rom-coms, not sex comedies.
No, like Hot Dog the movie.
Oh, like that kind of stuff. Oh my God.
Yeah.
A totally dead genre, I feel. American Pie was like the last of the movies or something.
Like 80s sex comedies, like
Porky's.
Hot Dog the movie, Porky's. Porky's is the lowest one of those, but
Caddyshack.
Mischief. Caddyshack, sure. But Caddyshack is on the cusp. It's not really a sex comedy. It sort of has moments of it. But anyway, the ones that they're advertised by, boobs.
Yeah,
That's what and
on the video at the video store on the packaging. Yep, on the video.
And he's like, and he tweeted the other day. He said, "I've lost family members, and I was really feeling horrible and very down. But I found this genre, and it feels to me like it's full of like optimism and life, and I really like boobs in movies." And
here's my last quip about this, Doug.
Yeah.
So you were coconut pilled. And I was like, how is Doug coconut pilled? Oh, because of course Doug likes coconuts.
That's true. I do like coconuts. But the point I'm trying to get at here by bringing him up is that that he's reaching back.
She might be busty. She kind of hides it though.
No, she is. I've seen pictures of her when she's younger.
You would pick up on that. You would. Anyway.
Yeah. The point that I'm making is that this is a young kid who's trying to reach back to a time where things seemed less constrained. Maybe they weren't super intellectual or they weren't correct. I think a year or two ago, people might have written articles like, "Can you believe these movies ever existed?" Right?
Yeah.
And he's like, "Can you believe these movies ever existed? Isn't it great?" And that sentiment, I think, is associated with Trump.
It gives you hope. It does give you hope. It does.
Right. But it also, it gives you hope. And I think it indicates some hope for socialism, actually, crazily enough, because it means there is a regular approach to life where straight guys like breasts and they will watch these kinds of movies and they're not going to be suppressed about it. And they're also not, he's not some, I want women to be traditional and get back in the kitchen either, right?
No.
So it's not split that way. And I feel as though the Democratic Party particularly is trying to impose a way of thinking on the electorate, which disallows for that reality. And
desperately, they are trying to do that. They are.
Yeah. And so it's not like, so they're disconnected from the way people really think, but they're also really trying to impose a way of thinking on the electorate.
I think Carville, who I mentioned, he was like, yeah, nobody wants to be, scolded by middle-aged women, right? That the Democrats are going to fuck up the election because they're scolds. I mean, he's thinking about Hillary, I guess. And Kamala is a scold, but maybe not so much. And they've definitely taken a different tack with that. But if she had been a scold, then it would be over, right? And so maybe the funny thing about Biden, and maybe the Kamala campaign is picking up on this, because the speech that she gave and that Walz gave was very irreverent, and they made fun of J.D. Vance for fucking a couch or something, even though that's a totally made up story, right? So they're very Trumpy that way, right? And Biden was very Trumpy that way. In other words, Biden was kind of foul-mouthed and kind of ill-tempered, and also had a wicked humor, Dark Brandon, right? And so maybe Trump has improved American politics after all.
Maybe.
I remember our time, Doug, our lifetime.
Yeah.
It was like so boring.
Yeah,
Like
it's
so
true.
deeply boring, and Obama also. Like I feel like all the way up to 2016, it was stiflingly boring. It's like you couldn't have one thing out of place.
The other day, yesterday, in the parrot room, a socialist from Britain was telling us that he really thinks we have to avoid taking a stance in the culture war. And I just did take a kind of stance in the culture war when I was describing those movies, right? And so but what I'm reaching for here, Chris, is a way to say, okay, what we're trying to activate, what we're trying to organize politically, is the realm in which, yeah, you're not black if you're from Kenya, and the realm where, yeah, I like Hot Dog the movie, and the realm where you might drink too much on a Friday night or even on a Sunday night, and where real life is happening, and I think all the way that I'm describing it is probably kind of dead wrong and filled with cliches, but that's what I'm think we're trying to reach out to and organize. And what I'm hoping is that the Democrats are overplaying their hand right now.
Right, that's really what it boils down to. Because even the Trump thing was not bigotry when he said that she's not black. Like
Right.
that's the Democrats have to call it bigotry, but rather it was an attempt to puncture her veneer, right? It wasn't like, oh, and African Americans should hate immigrant blacks.
No,
wasn't
not at
really
all.
the point at all. But that's the way the Democrats, that it's ugly and it's trying to pit black people against each other and that kind of thing. And it's kind of like, yeah, actually, maybe the Democrats should be like, you should vote for Kamala, not because she's a black woman.
Obama didn't run on being black. Not like this.
Right.
Remember the speech? There's not a white America and a black America. There's one America.
She's going to try.
People were worried about post-racialism when he got elected.
Yes. They were worried about it. They were anxious about it. And so she might try the same thing in order not to fall into the trap. But the point is, no, it's too late for that. Meaning they've already played that hand way too strongly. And no one's going to buy that somehow the Democrats have abandoned it. Right? Like, basically, second term Obama, post presidency Obama, George Floyd protests, Black Lives Matter, wokeism. You can't just pretend it never happened.
Right.
Not in this election. They would like to. Maybe in 2028 they can, but not now.
Right.
So they're hoisted in their own petard, meaning that's what really Trump's point was. Is like,
do you think that I'm right to think this is a moment where last time you said it was, but where we could do a committee of correspondence, and we should talk more theoretically, I guess, in the second half. But do you think this is a moment that's ripe for that kind of political organizing?
There's a phrase that I keep in the back of my head by Ed Remus from when I launched my campaign for a socialist party to begin with, which is, now is as good a time as any, meaning it's always a good time for this because it's a kind of a permanent necessity, but it's also a specific opportunity. And, maybe we did have to go through 4 years of Trump, 4 years of Biden to come full circle and arrive at the same opportunity. I mean, I was actually thinking about this morning. I was thinking about platypus and I was thinking about this, like campaign for a socialist party, this kind of initiative. Is like, there is part of me that wants to say, can I have the last 10 years back? Can I have the last 20 years back? Meaning, children, if you had just listened to me 20 years ago, or if you had listened to me 10 years ago, couldn't we have been further along than we are now? Right? Because I'm not saying that we'd be able to avoid all the horrors that have taken place in the last 10 or 20 years. No. But we could be in a different position. Right? In other words, did we really have to go through all that? Did we have to exhaust every possible alternative before arriving at what was the obvious need to begin with? Except if maybe they didn't know, I guess. They didn't know. It's fine. I would like my own wisdom to count for something. Meaning, I always said to the platypus kids, look, I'm trying to spare you having to go through everything I went through to arrive where I am.
Yeah.
Because if you can only arrive there in middle age, it's a little bit late. And if the kids will never listen to you until they're middle-aged, it's late.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
But the millennials,
and I don't know if I'm not sure how many millennials are going to actually listen to us. I guess some of them are.
Some of them are, right? And so I kind of feel like, yeah, I wish that you had listened to me 10 years ago. Because it's not like people didn't know I existed. They did.
Right.
But they fended me off so mightily. I can't believe it. Although I have to say Derek Vaughn's doing a thing on my Lukács essay from 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And you guys did do a podcast on it back in the day. And I thought that it wasn't bad. Right? Actually. Right. And so I feel like, again, there was a possibility. But again, maybe at that time people didn't realize the true nature of that possibility, meaning they were kind of dealing with it at the level of ideas and they didn't recognize the practical.
No, right. It was very difficult. Look, at that time, I remember Derek Vaughn kept telling me, we need dual power. We need dual power. And I was like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
What is that? What is that? What do you mean? Yeah. How do we avoid just becoming an NGO, or how do we avoid just being a charity? Something like that. How do we avoid that? The very kind of, Ashley would talk about it in terms of, the politics of care. How do we avoid that? And also, we need dual power when? Because it was like, kept saying we need dual power after the revolution. Like, we'll need dual power after the revolution. And I was like, as if that was going to, in my mind at that time, because I was Kleiman pilled, I was like, well, we need to overcome the commodity form after the revolution. And I don't see.
That might be a little left commish.
No, it definitely is.
Yeah, on his part, right? And
on his part. On his part. On my part, I thought you meant with the.
On your part, maybe, but in a different way. Oh no! But the dual power thing, I feel like, is a kind of left comment kind of thing, and that's fine. Like the left comms do annoy me, but at the same time, of course, they are referring to something real, meaning it can't just be the party. I mean, this is my Lenin's liberalism. Like, in other words, if you had said to Lenin in July of 1917, it's going to come down exclusively to the cadre of the party, you would be like, yeah, that won't work.
My whole politics at that point was to say no to the Keynesian New Deal revival and to say we need a Marxist politics. I don't know what it will even be exactly, but I just know enough to know we don't need a return to the New Deal. And that was like from 2009, and certainly after Occupy, I knew that. And then Sanders and the fact that I got ejected from the MHI meant that had failed. That whatever I was trying to do, it failed because the alternative to the return to the New Deal politically within the MHI was Clintonism. It was not Marxism organizing for that. It was, stop the fascist. And
I think that the real challenge is that the left follows a script that it's unaware of the true purpose of that script.
Right.
We've talked about that before, that it's kind of like the millennials took up Adolf Reed. And I'll take some credit for that, by the way. In other words, I'll take some credit for the fact that people paid attention to Moish and paid attention to Adolf, because he was on our syllabus from the get-go.
Right.
But basically, it's kind of like, okay, you need to have New Deal style reforms in order to create conditions under which a workers' movement could be reborn.
Right.
And I feel like that turned from a sort of stopgap defensive position on the part of Reed in the face of neoliberalism circa 1980 into like that's the first step forward for the millennials. And it's like, actually, that's a complete reversal of the point, while still apparently being the same point, including in Adolf's own mind, because Adolf was a Bernie-crat too. Right? That's the best we can hope for. And that, meanwhile, it would create better conditions. Right? And it's like, but wait, actually, that wasn't really the understanding in 1980. Meaning this compromise was made for a different reason than it's being offered now.
And just remind me again, the reason it was made, that compromise was made in 1980, other than the election of Ronald Reagan, was because there had been a living Marxist political movement, at least seeming to arise, and then in order to hold on to it.
Yes. In other words, it wasn't some kind of like, well, the New Left failed, and therefore it was more like, well, what we have as far as any kind of leftism, now what needs to take priority is stopping this neoliberal onslaught. Meaning there was a sense of crisis in the 70s downturn. The sense of crisis was, this can translate into a new kind of labor militancy. It looked like that in the 70s. Or it's going to be taken up by the right.
Right.
And, you know, I mean, look, let's not forget, no one really saw Trump coming. So it's not like Jacobin magazine was started in order to prevent the right from taking advantage of the opportunity. It wasn't.
No, but we all knew that was a very big risk even before Trump came along. At least that's why when Trump came along, because of what happened in Greece, you know, that before, you know, there was,
Jacobin was founded in like 2010.
Say again?
Jacobin was founded in 2010.
Oh, yeah.
So what were they thinking? It's preoccupy. Right? They were not thinking what they ended up thinking.
Right. Yeah, they were founded a year after I started the podcast. Yeah. So yeah, we've both been around in this milieu for the equal amount of time.
Yeah. And motivated in similar ways. I mean, I don't know if you were motivated so much by the youth. You must have been.
No.
Not at all? No. Really?
I didn't. No, I was motivated by my own leftism, right? And desire to try to understand.
Difference. For me, my own leftism is never enough. If there aren't young people where there's some prospect of taking up the torch, carrying it forward, you know.
Look, I was 38 years old, and I was mourning the loss of my 20s. I mean, I was deluded, you know, like it's just
no. The 30s are not that old. They aren't.
Right.
But I don't know. I guess I've always had I guess that's my Marxism. I've always had this sense of like, look, anything real is like a 20-year proposition.
Right. And I was like, not even sure I was making a proposition, but just trying to figure out why what had happened. I mean, maybe we should talk about this in the other podcast, but I'll just say this. Having gone through the anti-war movement twice, once in 91 in a kind of as an observer, and then after the attacks of September 11th, as someone who was really dedicating hours and hours of time and trying to be a real participant in organizing, I discovered something which I should have known all along, but never did discover, which was that it's not just Osberg, but the whole of the left that isn't really there. Like I thought, I have been remiss. I haven't been giving my energy to what I ought to, but now I'm going to, because it's really necessary. And if enough people joined in on what's already here, we'd be able to do something. And then when the anti-war movement failed, I realized, no, that isn't true. And then by the time I saw what happened with Occupy and how that went wrong, I really realized, oh no, there's something really wrong with the left. It's not just a problem of capitalism or of the right or something really wrong on the left. But it took me until I was 40 to realize that, right? So to really understand that, and you knew that when you were 19 or something like that. You knew that
in my 20s. I mean, I would say, yeah, at Hampshire. I mean, I would say, fortuitous circumstance, meaning I had the Spartacists, I had my other kind of new left kind of instructors at Hampshire, and I had Adolf.
Right.
And that is a lot, actually. That's a lot to go on. It didn't feel like that at the time, but in hindsight, it was.
I had Adbusters magazine, Anarchy magazine, Reading Noam Chomsky, Z magazine, and none of it was part of my academic.
Did I write this in my Death of the Millennial Left? So no, I don't think that Ekbal Ahmad figured there. So he was a professor of mine at Hampshire, and I was always I should have written this in my Paths to Marxism. He always had this very amused attitude about Chomsky. He respected Chomsky, but he was like, yeah, the American left, about as good as they can do is Noam Chomsky. And I was like, don't sell us completely short like that, Ekbal. Ekbal, who Edward Said considered a mentor.
Right.
And I was just sort of horrified. In other words, he was just like, yeah, the American left is kind of whatever, and Noam Chomsky is about as good as you get. And I was like, no, So that was when I was in college. And I saw Chomsky speak, and I saw Michael Harrington speak, and they really annoyed me. That I know I wrote about because of their anti-Bolshevism bullshit, their anti-Marxist bullshit, and which I just knew at the time. I was like, yeah, this is some bullshit. Right, not to say that one shouldn't be critical of that history, but not like that. Not like the cheap shot that I thought they were giving. It's way too obvious. Because they would do that, and then they'd support the South African Communist Party. And I was like, so okay, so you're against Lenin and Trotsky, but somehow you like the Stalinists. You know what I mean? Out of some anarchism. Come on. And, there's always some racism. There was always some, Stalinism's good for people of color kind of crap. It was like that. And that's why, it was very important for me to have people like Adolf and Ekbal to just say, yeah, there is such a thing as the white left, and they're bullshit, meaning they're kind of racist. They have low expectations of people of color on the left.
Right.
Right. And that's still with us, too.
Yeah. Okay, listen, I'm going to take a break. We'll do another round, but I feel like this is a really good conversation, but it didn't quite land on exactly what Sublation needs to become to support.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
We'll talk about it in the Parrot Room. And I'm going to release last week's conversation, I think
with
from
Ashley.
The Sublation with Ashley for everyone, probably Friday. And,
great.
No, Friday is this, so sometime soon, maybe tomorrow. But I do think that some of these things that are behind the paywall need to be made public.
Yes.
So,
cool.
All right. I'll see you in the Parrot Room. If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.